And I was like, but can I beat her up though? Because she took out all my hair. But, I think that um, for me, it's letting people know that you can't reduce my identity down to a few characteristics and think you know who I am.
It's a very, very professor out here teaching us lessons today. Okay, yes. Athena, would you like to weigh in on the topic?
Yeah, sure. I think I definitely have become a chameleon through the years. Where there were pockets that I realized I felt more comfortable in. I thought I would have like an aha moment when I went to Japan, like, oh, this is my people. Or even when I went to Greece, I thought I would feel that way. But I would say I still felt very much like a tourist and a very Americanized mixed person. I will say going to Hawaii, I felt like I blended in. People thought I was a local. That's probably the only place in the world where people assumed I belong, which was very shocking to me. But I danced hula for many years, and as I mentioned, my grandfather was born on the Big Island, so I had that influence always. But actually going there, visiting multiple times, I'm like, wow, this is one place where people don't question what I am or wonder what I am, and I fit in. So I was really embraced by Hawaiian people, by folks that live there, and even by tourists. They just ask me for directions. I'm like, oh, I must look like I belong. I'm way more tan in Hawaii, by the way, so I look more like I fit in. But yeah, I feel like that is the place that I could kind of fit in. And then a lot of what everybody else said really resonated, because I just feel like, with your years of life, you have different perspectives. And skin color does play a huge role for me. The fetishization was more like, oh, you're lucky your skin is so pale. You're lucky you have such big eyes. And that maybe mainly came from my Asian side. And it was for me, I think that it was intended to be a compliment, but for me, it was a way to other me and make me feel like I'm not a part of the family, because it was always a focus on like what's different about Athena than her cousins. Let's point it out. But I know the intention was to make me feel good, but in doing so, it made me feel like I was different. And then also, I learned later, made a lot of my full Japanese cousins feel insecure about themselves. So that was kind of interesting that I learned later in life, was that, oh, they always would talk about how outgoing you are, and you talk a lot like Greek people, and you're not so like shy, and they would always commend you, but they never said that to me, and I found that out later, and I was like, wow, that was eye-opening. So I think it can do damage to a lot of children growing up in how they're spoken to, and the bystanders that are around too, because you are maybe talking in groups. So I think that that's something I've definitely learned to understand as I got older. And I will say, finding an online space was probably the biggest step toward understanding my identity. In college, Facebook was really new, and we did not have a mixed club at Pepperdine University. So I created a HAPA, like mixed Asian Facebook group. This is when only colleges could be on Facebook. So I created this like online community, and then through Google searching, I found, oh wow, there's a podcast over here called Addicted to Race. There's this website called Eurasian Nation. There's Kip Fulbeck doing the 100% Hapa book, doing photo shoots across the country. These are things that the internet opened the door for me to learn about, but also feel, oh wow, I'm not the only one like me, and there's many others out there. We're just not in one location. We're all spread out, and we could kind of find community online. And then it ended up, I don't know if those of you that are local to LA may remember the Mixed Roots Film and Literary Festival, and a lot of mixed events started, kind of, I would say, the height of it, and a lot of mask events as well. I found mask later on, and then in like 2011, the Hapa Japan, which was very specific, which was half or mixed Japanese folks, had a big conference through USC, and I believe it started in Berkeley. So those things really helped me learn myself and love myself. And I'm grateful. I'm really grateful to orgs like MASC that exists to like help foster like identity, understanding, and pride. So yeah.
Amazing shout outs too as well. So as we could see from, depending on like where you are and who is around and like what kind of communities are present, there is different ways in which we navigate our identity. And also factoring into that is the fetishization, which everyone has touched on, and then which is, you know, across the board a common experience for mixed race people. And then on top of that, we have, you know, political climates, social climates factoring in as well too. So we're gonna talk about that. We're also gonna talk about how, you know, finding your communities is so essential. Just like Athena mentioned, you know, you can go online, you can find so many different communities, which actually has been so helpful. And also the implementation of like social media becoming bigger and bigger, people being able to find each other, you know. So when it comes to the fetishizing aspect and our experiences with that, I know we've all kind of talked about that, and many of us have experienced that, you know, in a myriad of different ways that a lot of people might feel like they're giving us a compliment, but then it sometimes feels like you're, you know, isolating or like continuing to like recognize that I am this like other. And that can be really tough depending on how old you are, especially if you're like 13, you know, going through puberty and everyone just wants to be like each other at that point, right? You don't really want to stand out too much. And this is just like another layer in the mixed journey. So I know we've talked a little bit about it, but how have you navigated some of the experiences kind of throughout your life when it comes to fetishization as a mixed AAPI person? And what would be one tool or strategy that you recommend for others to help protect their identity and well-being? Surya, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. I guess going back to a little bit of how things changed from when I was in Louisville, Kentucky to then New York. Just trying to think, I feel like looking back, not so much of like appearance, that it was more religion that for me made a difference growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, and how I, for some reason, I have this memory that I didn't realize until later that was a microaggression. Like when 9/11 happened, I was in sixth grade history class, and a student who was a friend of mine said something like, "Is your father Osama bin Laden?" And I thought it was a joke. I didn't know. And it's like there were more of like, not so much about appearance, but it was like knowing I was Muslim, knowing my name was Surriya Ahmad. But it's like then completely different experience in, you know, college and then New York. It was more of like, I feel like in more inclusive spaces, and I've never experienced that kind of microaggression ever again. It was like, I feel like at least knowingly or outright. But in general, like appearance wise, I think that it's sort of like geographically, it's almost like I felt like then I wasn't diverse enough, judging myself and other out of Louisville, Kentucky. It was like, then I was like, okay, now I have to prove that I'm half Pakistani. Now it's almost like I found myself having experienced that, and then in other places realizing and wondering and judging if I'm not Punjabi, Pakistani enough. And it's like, I think there have been times then that I felt guilty. Like if people were like, oh, you look XYZ or you look like this, then it was like trying to grapple with, I think the best piece of advice, like in general, is that going back to how do we define ourselves and what values do we have, instead of letting other people define who we are. There's no right and wrong of how you feel you are. Your identity and your experience and your reality is real from your point of view. And it's internalizing that and realizing that no matter, because other people are coming out and saying things, if they are saying things, it's from their own experiences and it's their own backgrounds. And it's like, if we have to think and change based on who we're talking to in any given situation, it's not possible. And it's almost like, to try to do that, I have felt the most outside my body and outside myself when I've tried to please everyone around me. But I think it's just recently, and so grateful for spaces like these, honestly, and just being able to sort of realize that no matter who you are and how you feel, your reality is real. And so it's sort of that kind of internalizing and realizing we're okay as we are and we're enough, no matter what. Because other people are going to have their experiences. They're going to say what they want, but it's based on their experiences. So there's no right and wrong, and they're not wrong. Probably they have their own background. They're coming at it from their own like adversities, hardships, or their positive, experiences. So I think that's the most important thing that I've realized from all of it.
Absolutely. Self-identification, like if you accept yourself, you will belong anywhere. Like that could really be the thing. Yeah, Donna, would you like to weigh in as well? And maybe what is a like, I guess, a tool or a strategy that you would recommend to someone who's younger and still trying to figure it out? Because, when we get older, it's a little bit easier to be like, yeah, accept yourselves. But when you're younger, it's totally different.
Yeah, so I definitely have had experiences with
It's a funky word. It's
it's
funky.
a funky word, fetishization. I'm going to get it out eventually. Um, but my experience with it has largely come from Black folks, um, particularly because of the skin color and the long hair. Those are kind of markers of closer to whiteness that I think people want to obtain or possess or have access to. And so, I'm thinking about a situation where I was in a record store. So that lets you know how old I am. So I was in a record store. Those things existed back then. And I'm getting, take my purchases up to, pay. And the guy he just stops. And I said, is something wrong? And he's like, you got some serious Indian in you. And I'm like, what? What did you say? Where did you get that from? And what does that have to do with the price of my, CD? Um, and I said, no, I'm actually not. And he said, really? And I said, yeah. And so he does, I said, you tell me what I am, since you've already decided you know who I am and what I am. And it's a long dance because he doesn't even he doesn't touch Asia at all. That doesn't even come up into his. And I said, so why are you so, why was that supposed to be a compliment? And he was like, yeah, because you're not like the other Black girls. And I was just like, oh, here we go. Uh, and it's in those moments where it's, like kind of the kind of racial caste within your own community. And so he's kind of, putting me up here, on this pedestal, but there is a sexualization to that at the same time because he wants my phone number, he wants access to me. He wants to be able to possess, you know, this lightness, this long hair. Uh and so yeah, I've experienced it quite a bit. Ironically, I have Filipinos, once I tell them that I'm part Filipino, they're like, oh, I see it now, and so, it's kind of a belated thing. They were like, but I always thought you were half white. I was like, no, I'm not. Uh, but in terms of a tool, I honestly think that learning, again, I'm a historian, learning these histories will equip you with the kind of knowledge to kind of clap back when people say stuff to you. I think a lot of times young people are trying to defend themselves based on stereotypes that people see in media and hear from their friends. And when they're not informed, you can't really, challenge them. I saw somebody wrote in the chat something about the one drop rule. And I always say, like, why do Black people apply the one drop rule if it's so racist? The intent of it is racist, is to say that you are not pure enough to be like us. So there's something wrong with your mixture, you know. And so why would you embrace something that's racist? But you got to learn that history in order to know that it actually exists. So and then that you can combat it. And so I think, you know, I've been in ethnic studies for about more than half of my career as an academic. And, you know, when the students come into class, they often start out real, you know, ignorant. They'll say these different types of stereotypes and things that they've seen in media. And by the time, hopefully, they end the class, they're like, oh, I'm actually really proud of my racial identity because I'm giving them a literacy by which they can say, no, that's incorrect. You know, we all don't do this thing. And even if we did, so what, mind your business, you know, but you can't clap back when you are ignorant yourself. So that's the tool I would give to most young people, you know, and for their parents, you know, if the kids are not getting this stuff in school, you can buy books. You can surround them with people who will get, you know, put them in organizations like MASC that will help, you know, help build them up because there's so many opportunities to tear young mixed race kids down.
100%. Yeah. As also a fellow history lover, although I'm not, I don't have the credentials like the amazing Dr. Donna, but history does play such a big role in so much of this. And I do feel like I do have parents personally who would like make sure that we felt like we were full members of each of our cultures. And I think parents doing that is such a big help for children. However, at the same time, like when you're able to kind of connect the dots to history and how it ripples to the present, it just makes such a difference in understanding it. Because I was going to say one of the conversations I've had with Athena, who, you know, grew up on the West Coast, several times we've talked about how her access to language has been affected by history, you know, with the Japanese internment camps and stuff like that. So, and I think sometimes we grow up really ashamed or like we're not enough because we don't have maybe these cultural components, but how much of political, social elements play into it? How much does things like colorism play into it? How much, and it's so much to navigate, and it's so layered. And so I guess when you do put the roots down in history, you can start to arm yourselves a little bit more with support and resources and understanding for yourself. So yeah, Athena, do you have a tool that you would recommend too to kind
Yeah,
of protect your well-being from fetishization?
sure. I will say, if I could just say a few things. Yeah, I've experienced some of like, my dad is not Muslim, but I have Muslim relatives and he speaks Arabic. So during 9/11, my dad had a similar situation where he was speaking Arabic in public, and he was with my mom, and someone made a comment, "Oh, you're making your wife drive so you could throw bombs out of the car." So very like triggering things, that have happened to my family through the year. And you wouldn't, in Los Angeles, I guess you wouldn't expect such blatant kind of comments, but I think as much as that one was maybe ill-intended, I really try as my tool, um, and instead of taking offense, sometimes I really, really try my best to think about intention and ignorance and where the person is coming from. Is it truly just, oh, they're just interested and they're asking a question or making a comment because they're intrigued and they really want to know? Or is it they are trying to offend you? And I feel like that makes a difference in how you respond. Because you could choose, and nobody has to be that person that teaches somebody. It shouldn't have to be that way where you feel like you're obligated to be the teacher. But I feel, at least with the folks that are well intended, that it's brought me an opportunity to be a voice for our I guess community, to let them know, I can be 100% this and that at the same time, simultaneously. So, and I think it was like the filmmaker Jeff Chiba Stearns. I know he's put it a lot, this way, like, you don't have to be segments or like dissect yourself. You can be at the same time 100% this and 100% that, and it's perfectly fine. I think people think, oh, I got to put on, today I got to put on my Greek hat because I'm going to Greek festival and let me really like try to prove myself there. But it's like, no, it's okay. I can be Japanese at a Greek festival, and I can be part Egyptian and part all the things I am, and that's fine, and people should accept me as that. And there's a lot of surprises I've seen along the way where people do welcome you. But I feel if you are defensive or you assume it's going to be a negative thing that they're trying to do, um sometimes you got to meet people where they are, and a lot of times it's just ignorance, like someone meant, like it's been mentioned that everybody's I think Surriya, am I saying it right? Yeah, she mentioned like it depends on they're influenced by their own upbringing too. So it's like I feel personally, I speak for myself. I feel like I can't expect acceptance or understanding if if I don't understand that they also may have a very limited view too. So that's just my take on it. I know it's maybe unpopular because, people don't want to have that burden of educating others. But so far yet, I've not been burnt out yet. But maybe ask me in 2 years, maybe I'll be tired of explaining myself and feel like I don't need to. But for now, I feel like it's opened doors to be like, oh, well, what are you? Like, don't just ask what I am. What are you now? And then some people will be like, oh, I'm just white. And I'm like, no, like, where is your family from? Like, and I feel like that empowers people too to be like, oh, maybe I should think about my heritage and not just say, oh, I'm just black or I'm just white or I'm just this. It's like just because I'm mixed and exotic, which is the fetishizing word I've heard in the dating world a lot. Oh, you're exotic, or, I'm not the typical slender, maybe they're assuming I'm going to be a stereotypical slender like Asian woman. I'm curvier, so that, oh, you're exotic and you're different, and that's where I feel I've seen it most is in the dating world, is the comments and things like that. And I just feel, those areas are kind of like it's gross when you hear those comments. But if it's an everyday like grocery store thing and someone's like, oh, what's your background? I try not to like snap back. I try really hard to be like, oh, and what are you? Why don't you talk about what you are too? Let's throw it back to them. So that's my tool.
No, that's definitely wonderful advice. And also I have noticed sometimes if someone is like, I'm sure we've all unfortunately experienced the stranger that stops you on the street and says, I have to know what you are and why you look like that. Sometimes like putting it back on them of like, okay, so what are you? Actually, it's very jarring for them, and I
Yeah.
find gets them to realize maybe I shouldn't just be throwing out this "what are you"
Mhm.
every to just people I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot, right? Okay. So I was also wondering. So something we know, like we've mentioned, is the politics and the systems around us and that have existed throughout history in this country. They shape so much of our lived experience, and it's something that we can trace back through various histories and various pieces of legislation. And because of this history and systemic situation, the politics around race and belonging are very visible and heavy depending on where you live. I mean, it's such a spectrum in some places, or it's just so varied because of the different histories in each region. So even on the West Coast and pockets of the South and Midwest, where we do have fourth and fifth generation Asian Americans, there is more diversity perhaps, but that doesn't always mean that there's more acceptance. There can be quite a longer history of assimilation because of that, or this cultural shame that exists because maybe you're different from other people. So I was wondering, how has the political climate of your region and then various regions you've been to impacted your identity journey, and what has maybe been the biggest culture shock for you that you've experienced in the process? Whoever would like to go first can start.
I feel like in recent times, if I could, sorry, I'll start. um, I feel like obviously the current political situation now, and really in my adulthood has really just reminded me how similar our paths are as like our minority groups are, and what plights they're on, and how we need to be advocates for each other, and not just marching for your own people but for others is super important, because we're as the cliche phrase, we are stronger together. And I feel like I'm seeing more allyship happening, but there's definitely room for more. And it's I think like when the Stop Asian like hate happened, like after around COVID time, it was nice to see other cultures come out. But you could also say like, okay, well, they came out for us. Where are we? And I've heard that criticism. And, culturally, at least for me and my Asian side and Japanese side, I feel sometimes there is this resistance to like make waves or be outspoken or draw negative attention or talk about controversial things because you're so worried about what your face, you want to save face. And I think that is something that I'm seeing a change in for sure. Like I've seen more at least I've seen a lot of mixed Asians out there, like when it comes to like immigration the ICE protests. So that's been nice to see. But sometimes maybe because they don't look, full Asian, I think people they are under the radar and people are like, oh, there's no Asians out there because I've seen that criticism. And I'm like, actually I've seen some mixed Asian looking people out there. Maybe they got lumped into, oh, they're probably Latino, but it's been nice to see sprinkles of folks here and there, but I do think we need to do more. We need to do more ourselves, but also to inspire welcoming in, and it's not just our fight and like, you know, keeping that like something. I know it can be sensitive where we feel we are the only ones that really understand our people's plight, but I think we are way stronger if we make allies and friendships in other communities.
For sure, I absolutely agree. Dr. Donna?
You saw me shake my head. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Athena that it's important for us to try, particularly in this political climate. Um, silence is not going to protect us. We just had case in point with the Hyundai plant down in Georgia. So immigration cuts across race, it cuts across ethnicity. And so we need to all be out there. I was very, very vocal and angry with, some African Americans who were saying, well, Latinos voted for Trump. And I was like, first of all, most of them did not. But even if that were the case, the inhumanity of what's happening with these ICE raids should give us all pause, because if you think it's only going to happen to one group, you are sadly mistaken. And again, our plights are intertwined. Um, what happens to one of us is going to eventually catch up and happen to all of us. So I do think it's really important for us to look at this as and I hate to say like, like we're one race, because that is a way to flatten our experiences. And I definitely don't want to do that. But these are human rights issues, you know, uh, and not in the civil rights sense, but in a basic, we should have the freedom to be able to walk up and down the street without violence. We should have access to water. We should have access to food and housing and those sort of things. But you know, I always say the American project is based on racism. And because racism is so tied to capitalism and who gets to, you order relations based on money. And so it thrives off of somebody being at the bottom. And I think we know this, and yet we play into this by trying to hoard some resources and stay over in our little corners. But, eventually, let's just use Asian Americans as an example. If they stay quiet over in the corner and think they're safe, eventually the system will annihilate all the other groups, and then it's like, oh, they still have resources, let's go over there and take theirs too. So it would make more sense if we would come together on the things that we can come together on. Again, I don't like flattening people's experience and saying everybody experiences racism or gender or sexuality the same way, because that's not realistic. But where we can find places, particularly when it comes to economics, let's be honest, those are places where we can, I think we have to, because look at what's happening to the economy. Every group except for white women, including white men, which is wild to think about it, has had unemployment losses since uh, 47 has taken over in January. And it's been a precipitous drop for Black women, And so, you know, I don't know if people are just kind of sitting back waiting to see what's going to happen, but if the people who are like some of the people who are the lowest paid are losing jobs left, right, and center, eventually it's going to chip away at all of us. So I'm saying all of this to say is that in a political climate such as this one, people trying to pursue their own aims is eventually going to catch up to them, and it's going to hurt everybody. You know, when we had affirmative action, uh, there was a period of time when, you know, Black and brown fought with each other in Los Angeles over like very, very tiny resources. And, you know, the powers that be were just sitting there like, okay, y'all keep fighting, because now we'll eventually get rid of affirmative action, because now you guys want to fight and that sort of thing. So I think it's important for us to be like situationally aware that these politics will destroy us if we don't get over ourselves and decide we got to come together.
100% true. I mean, even if you look back through history, largely a lot of the progress has come through acts of solidarity, and that's a big topic that I've, you know, spoken about for a long time, and that's why knowing the history is so important. And even going to certain places, like I remember living in Arkansas, we were the only mixed race family, and it was, you know, very obvious, and so that would invite in lots of different experiences. But then when you understand, you know, living in somewhere where you take the wrong turn, you end up in Klan country or something like that. There's just places that, you know, I know in particular, because my partner, he's a Black man, I just know we would never live because of the politics and because of the history of those regions and those areas, and how much it can affect how you show up as you, and whether or not you're safe as well is a big thing. Surriya, do you have anything you want to add?
I feel like not too much more. I 100%, I agree with what both speakers have said. And I feel like not a lot more really to add. I think that just the big thing that pops into mind, just to kind of like the global summary in my head of feeling what Dr. Nicol said, just of that, yeah, the identity, the urge in my head of wanting to, how are we more alike than different? And that urge to come together, but at the same time, yeah, it's your own identity, yes, you know that, but it's also like that urge of just I just try to find how are we more alike than different without losing your own identity, is just sort of like something that I try to do, and just to live by in general. I think I'm always trying to find similarities. How am I like? How are we alike? How can we come together without losing your own identity, though? And with whatever group or however we're relating to others. And I'm just trying to think specifically. I don't have any well, I guess just like history with, at least I really feel this way with amongst my like Indian friends, being from my father from Pakistan, and it's like realizing there's a whole history there, but it's that generation, maybe the view of it in the past is different than those who are living and integrating now, and realizing how similar, and it's, of course, there's a religious difference, but it's like how similar the groups are. And, but to have specific identities, but it's like, there's a lot of like political climate there that sort of influences, overshadowing that's just like there, but it's like at the heart of it, like when we're living day to day with our good friends, and realizing how similar we are. And that's like that has impacted me a lot. And having some best friends who are Indian, just in general.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think just a really big thing is, even in our current political climate, right? There are so many ways that I think a lot of us can see. I think I always say that one of the superpowers of mixed race people is because we often find people who are not like us, we're almost able to like be these social butterflies who can kind of like adapt in any group, and we see the commonalities amongst the differences, and that's something that I find really common across our experience, which is amazing. So when we have these conversations and then we consider the political and social climates that are happening, it's like so often we go into this space of, yeah, but like we're so used to not being with people who are exactly like us, even though but we're able to find the similarities, and and at the same time it does play into the conversations that we're having and the topics that need to be addressed, like certain things that we have to navigate that play into all of this. Like, for example, Elaine mentioned in the chat, navigating and combating anti-Blackness, which is a very, very big topic amongst all of our communities. And it's because of the systems and the structures that we have that are feeling very empowered because of the current presidential administration that is here. So, there is even more of a question of safety and who could be next and the importance of solidarity. So, I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that before we move on to talking a little bit more about community.
Well, I dealt with working. It is so funny. The Korean American Resource Center in Orange County um, uh, had me come in because they had a group of Asian American and Hispanic Latinos working to do canvassing. Well, it was more like voter registration, but they were experiencing, they were, there were two members who were Black who were experiencing some real interesting race politics. And so I came in and I was supposed to do a kind of 1 day session, kind of assess what was going on. And instead of saying, it's bad to be, anti-Blackness is bad and stuff, I started with, I showed them I simplified African American history into this one big chart. And I said, so where's your story in this? Like, where do you fit? And because I needed the Asian American and Hispanic Latino folks in this group to see where they were in terms of commonality. And so that if you are engaging in anti-Blackness, you're reproducing what has been done to you and what you've experienced, whether it's, gentrification in its worst forms, or, segregated neighborhoods and so forth. So that's how I had to start with them, is to get them to see where they fit into this American story, but instead of in relation to white people, see themselves in relation to other people of color. And I had some tears. I had some gnashing of teeth, I'm sure, because folks were not ready to see themselves as connected to Black folks. They weren't overtly racist, but they weren't also working to end, like they weren't being active anti-racist. And so I think for a lot of folks, it's showing them where the commonality is. And then the second thing that I had them do is I said, think about a family member who might say little racist stuff, And I said, if you had to give an elevator pitch to your grandmother who calls your cousin their little negrito and it rubs you the wrong way, how would you address that? So it's putting the responsibility on them to address anti-Blackness. And I'm not going to say in 1 day the whole thing got solved or fixed or whatever, because that's not the way it worked. But I think what it did, and this is the feedback I got years later, is that it opened their eyes to where they were engaging in this behavior that they thought was only reserved for white people, that only white people engaged in anti-Blackness. And it's like, no, you can perpetuate it too. Black people can perpetuate it as well, And so I think activities like that, where you have to confront your own stuff, because that's what I realized is most of those young people didn't even know their own history. And so I was like, take out your phone and try to figure out Chicano history in 400 years real fast and figure out where you fit. So I think we have in this country an ignorance gap that is so huge that it orders our social relations and our policy making. Um, People do a lot of stuff out of being just plain old stupid.
100 can agree to that. That is very, very true. Yeah, and I think understanding, like you said, the history and like where we fall into it, and understanding even like as mixed race people, systemically, everything we experience is because of systemic racism and systemic oppression and the history that is attached to all of this. So I think that's such an important point. And when you're brought up in it, in our society is just basically teaching us these teachings over and over and over again. You have to actively be curious with yourself so you can unlearn that. And a lot of times people don't realize it, because like you said, a lot of people don't realize maybe that they're like, I'm not racist, but are you anti-racist? And do you know what that means? It's a very, very good conversation to have with yourself. So I have another question for y'all. I've found that a big commonality in a lot of what y'all have been talking about is community. And I've found that community in finding it in really unexpected places. Sometimes it's online, sometimes it's through organizations like this, like MASC, sometimes it's in books, etc. Has been so helpful for shaping your identity and feeling like you have a place where you belong. So I want to know how community has helped you feel most at home in your identity, or are you still on the hunt for the best right fit? And what advice would you give to others seeking that belonging? So, Athena, I know you mentioned some orgs already, but do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I feel like I feel like I grew up in a bubble, and I felt like I had to be fitting in one of the other bubbles or in the bubble I grew up in order to like really fit in. But I feel like just like my identity has been fluid, and just like how like I've felt different in different scenarios. I feel like there's no one place you even have to stay, or one community you feel like you have to be in. Um, and it's okay to like travel amongst communities, and even communities that are unlike yours. I mean, I think maybe because we are mixed, I feel like that gives us a comfort in being in, oh, we were always pushed to be the other or be different or not fully accepted. So it's opened my eyes to even embrace cultures that I'm not even a part of, and it's made me want to learn more about others. So I feel like I find community now as an adult, in my early 40s. I find it everywhere now. I feel like I can find friends that and people that embrace me in other cultures just as my own now, and that it's just fluid for me now. And if it's not for you, I would say maybe my advice would be just to try to just go into a whole room of people you have nothing, in common with, and just try it out. And I don't know, maybe some people, if you're more introverted, it might be more of a challenge, but you could find those places online too, where you're not physically in the space of others. But I feel you learn a lot more about other people, and you end up learning more about yourself that way.
Absolutely agree. Surriya, would you like to add?
Sure. For me, this really strikes me specifically because I feel like for me, my sense of community and belonging has really sort of just escalated when I found this very supportive improv comedy community in New York, at the Magnet Theater specifically. They basically, I feel like it's just sort of, I think I've done comedy before. I did it in, undergrad, like end of undergrad. I think my whole identity for the longest time was sort of around like at least the values that I was sort of taught growing up. It's like I think a lot, it just was always like surrounding being a doctor. And I think this had a lot to do with like my father's influence, and he was a surgeon. And I think going back to having empathy for everyone, I think for him, that's what he valued. So he really sort of tried to sort of put that on his children. I don't think it was wrong. And I'm very grateful to have become a doctor, but I think it's like this, for me, having kept comedy and improv like before I went to med school, and finding that and keeping that hobby going. And it's been sort of a constant for me throughout my training as a doctor, and then in different cities and even different countries. When I did study abroad in Madrid, I did improv. So it's kind of been like an anchor for me. And I think for me, it was like just finding what I love to do, and then finding a group that was kind, supportive, and loving, and feeling like in that community, I was able to also express who I was and what I stood for, and having this voice to then be like a voice for mixed race improvisers and comedians. And it's kind of like through this helping me sort of combine my comedy and doctor world, and it's helped me make sense of who I am a little bit. And I think it goes back to like what I value, and I love comedy. So I think any advice I would have if someone's looking for a community, it's like it could start not necessarily with, it might not be your profession or even a cultural or religious organization. It might be a hobby that then sprouts, that then makes you realize and help make sense of it. And then it could all make sense after that. But I didn't know that necessarily when I first started doing improv comedy, but it has ended up being like really helped with my sense of community and belonging, and how I define myself with respect to the other aspects too. So I think for me, that's been a big, big part of my life for sure. And
That's amazing. Yeah. And then going out and doing something that you're like, okay, comedy, improv is really cool. It's like a cool medium, but then creating that space like you did with All Mixed Up for mixed race people and mixed race comics to come in and kind of have that representation, but also that affinity with one another is so important. You know, sometimes you do have to create the space that you've always needed and wanted for yourself. Dr. Donna, would you like to add any pieces of wisdom for us?
I don't know if it's wisdom, but there were two things that I was able to do in order to kind of find a sense of community. One was there was a website back in the day called Blasian Narrative. It doesn't exist anymore, but Blasian Narrative was basically a place for Black women and Asian men to talk about their representation, um, in media. And so, for at the time that I jumped onto the thing, I was like, okay, I hope this is not a hookup site, because I'm married already. I'm not interested in that part of this. But what it did provide was an opportunity for me to start to. We had a dream casting. It was a competition to uh create a story where you had a Black woman and Asian men as the central characters. And so I ended up doing NaNoWriMo, which is National November Writing Month, and I wrote pretty much half of a novel about the Ata people in the Philippines, who were like the Black Filipinos, and then with the Japanese. So it gave me a writing outlet, and I was interested in that. And then once my brain was pretty much fried with writing, I joined a dance community that was mixed. It had different races of people, so it was mostly Filipino, but it also had, Black folks and white folks and Mexican folks, and we would travel up to the Bay Area, mostly out of San Jose. And so, I think to Surriya's point, finding activities or interest or hobbies is one way to build community. So it doesn't have to depend on the ethnicity necessarily, but the activity, and then it can kind of sprout from there. Um, because like I have a nephew who is very, very, I'm almost going to say obsessed with, like Chinese culture and things like that. But the thing is like he's not putting himself into activities where he could meet people and talk to people. So everything is kind of filtered through this media lens. And I want him to understand you have to, you have to, you have to find people in their activities, not just simply because of their race or their ethnicity.
Yeah, I think that that's a wonderful point. As well, I would say nowadays too, even on social media, there's so many dedicated pages. Like I have one on Instagram, like I said, Mixed Present. I'll put it in the chat. But there's so many different mixed race spaces online and communities where you can, you know, see people reflect back the similar experience and answer questions and just share different things. I remember when it was like the earlier days of Instagram and it wasn't at all like it is now. And I was like actively looking for mixed race representation in people. And a lot of times the pages would just like post pictures of their followers who were mixed race. And 99% of the time it was a half black, half white, specifically girl with light eyes, curly hair, you know what I mean? And it was usually that kind of representation. And it's been really nice to see that there's more podcasts and more pages and more just representation of what mixed race can really look like for everybody, especially mixed Asian. I very rarely saw that actively represented early on, so it's really nice to see, and it's cool to see more of that featured in movies and media and stuff like that as well too, although I do hope it becomes a little bit more well-rounded, because sometimes it's usually not. You know, I want to say, as someone who's moved across so many regions, I've learned, as we can all kind of discern from this discussion, identity is never fixed. It shifts with where you are, who you're around, how you're seen, what communities you're part of. But the thread that ties us together is that community aspect. And I hope everyone here leaves today with a deeper sense of connection and belonging. So I have two like quick final questions for each panelist to answer. But as I do that, if people would like to drop in the chat what their favorite takeaway was or anything like that, I would love to see. And for the panelists, if you could try to quickly answer, just because we're wrapping up, but what gives you hope for the future of the mixed AAPI community space, and what's something you're proud of yourself for? So, Dr. Donna, you want to go first? Sorry, you're already up on my screen.
So what is the first question again?
It's what gives you hope for the future of the mixed AAPI space, and then what's something you're proud of yourself for?
I'm gonna be verbose, so let somebody else go first, and then
Okay.
I'll try to.
I could also kick us off if you guys need another minute. Or Surriya?
Sure. I don't want this to sound corny or anything, but for me, I'm new to I feel like social media side of the mixed race community. So for me, it's having entered this like within the last, over the last year. It sort of, for me, it's like seeing these communities and platforms and advocates who are leaders and sort of having events like these and having discussions. For me, that brings me hope that we are like bringing to the forefront the experience and reality of being mixed race. And for me, that brings me hope, because I guess, in general, not even just being newer to the online community, but I think just talking about it more and realizing we can all share together, that it brings me hope that there's events like these. So thank you.
I love it. And what's something you're proud of yourself for?
So for me, it's rationalized. I think for me, it's somehow, I think it's being a doctor and a comedian at the same time. It was really hard at certain times in residency to keep up improv comedy. And I always forced myself to, and I'm really realizing it this year. I just became a house team member at the Magnet Theater on a recurring improv comedy team on Wednesday nights, most Wednesdays. And then I'm also still a doctor, and I'm, navigating how much I want to work and being able to pick up shifts when I want as an emergency medicine physician, and also keeping up being an academic EM from the geriatric emergency medicine side. So I think I'm proud of being able to do both at the same time, and just sort of like trying to support myself in that journey of how to make both work, which is newer over the last couple of years.
I love it, combining the quote unquote serious with like the true. But that's what being mixed is, right? We're just living our full truth. I love it. Okay, Athena?
I think what gives me hope is that this work continues. I mean, I think there's been so much change for those of us that have been in the mixed space world for like 20 plus years. You've seen some orgs fall off or some speakers disappear, or even, I'll say, even for my own mixed marrow, I kind of went on a hiatus of exploration of like, okay, how am I going to continue doing this? Because you do get burnt out. But I am so grateful that there are orgs like MASC that have lasted, and there are people that are still talking about important issues. And I love that there are folks doing things like comedy that bring like levity and like something light, because it's such heavy stuff sometimes that we do need the creatives out there. So like when I see that, I'm like, oh good, because I feel sometimes we can get really heavy into these topics and it could be hard. And it's also more inviting too when we have groups like that. So I really commend like the comedians, the dancers, the filmmakers out there that I think make this identity and all the conversations around identity more digestible, and forums like this that bring us into, you know, places together that maybe we couldn't be in a physical place at one time. So that's the hope, is the future and the folks that are still holding the torch. I commend all of you.
I love it. And then quickly, you want to add something you're proud of yourself for?
Oh, I think my journey with Jeff Chiba Stearns, who's an animator and mixed race filmmaker out of Canada. I think our film, I feel like, brought a lot of our film Mixed Match brought a lot of cures, you know, but also like just a lot of, I think, awareness overall to a maybe serious topic that would have never maybe got folks interested if it wasn't for it being a film. So
Sure.
that's something I'm proud of, that, yeah.
I love it. Amazing. All right. And Dr. Donna?
Okay, so to keep it brief, because you know I like to talk. All right, so one thing that I'm very hopeful about with the mixed AAPI community is, one, that the younger generation is going to challenge the older generations that didn't want to talk about race in any kind of meaningful way. The avoidance is, I think, was holding folks back. And I also am very appreciative of of seeing more and more um, classes that are very specific about the mixed AAPI experience. I don't know if Jennifer Yee is still on the call, but uh, I didn't have that, you know, when I was coming up. And so I didn't have an opportunity to explore this mixed race identity. I came back to her class as a speaker, you know, but I would have liked to be on the other side as a student so I could so that I could create and find community in, you know, in an educated way. So those are so I'm hopeful that those things continue and grow and expand. Uh, Proud of, huh? I am proud of my work on conservative philanthropy and race. So I study how conservative philanthropy orders race relations in the United States. I'm one of the few scholars that do that, and I'm mostly proud of the fact that Al Jazeera is the one that picks up all of my work. And so I like to be, you know, I like to be a thorn in people's side. So yeah, I'm proud of that work.
I love it. So very, very accomplished. And yeah, and I'll just add that I am also grateful because these conversations continue to evolve. And it's so nice to hear because so many folks, you know, when you have your own community space, you hear from all different generations. And a lot of folks who are maybe come from the boomer age or even Gen X are like, yeah, these conversations were so rare previously. And it's nice to kind of see it continue to evolve and grow. And I just hope that that continues on. And I'm really proud of everybody on this panel. And I purposefully try to ask everybody what they're proud of because sometimes it's like really hard for us to not be hard on ourselves. So thank you to our panelists today for sharing your powerful stories and perspectives. And thank you to everyone who joined us as well. This event was hosted by Multiracial Americans of Southern California that I'm a board member of. And so to stay connected, I would like you to please follow us and join future events where we continue these important convos. And I'll have the panelists let us know where you can find them and put it in the chat as well. And you guys can also plug anything you have coming up as well too. So whoever would like to go first. Just let us know where your socials are, where people can follow you and find you if there's anything else to know. And then add it in the chat too, please.
But I'm just going to say thank you so much for having me and including me in this very important discussion. And I'm grateful to be part of this community and space. So thank you so much. And I dropped what I mentioned earlier in the chat about the All Mixed Up show on September 26th, 10:30 p.m. at the Magnet Theater. And I put my Instagram, if anyone is interested in being part of the show in the future or knows anyone who would want to come to this one, please share, and would love to talk about anything that we discussed on here in more detail, unrelated to comedy or related to comedy, medicine, geriatric emergency medicine, being mixed race or anything at all. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank
And
you
wonderful
so
to
much for joining us. Thank you so much
Wonderful.
for joining us. I know you came from another event, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, and wonderful to virtually meet the other two panelists. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Okay, Athena?
Chat, our film could be viewed online, Mixed Match, and I put our social handles for Mixed Marrow and Mixed Match, and I'm kind of in a reorganization phase, so it may be a little outdated, but I plan to come back, and do more in that space, but yeah, I love being on the advisory board of MASC. I think you guys are doing great things, and I hope to get more out of my little cave and do more stuff like this because I miss it a lot and I miss the folks. It's been a long time, and yeah, love to do more with you guys.
No, I love it. It's also an important reminder that we do have to, you know, have realistic expectations of ourselves and recharge. It can be like there's so much always going on, especially if you're in the advocacy activism space and organizing. So we got to remember to take care of ourselves. Absolutely. And then Dr. Donna?
Is Jen still on here? We did multiple articles together, but we did a podcast on Fresh Off the Vote, and it was about because we write about self-care and what is it like to be an activist or an academic that does this kind of work, and how do you preserve yourself? How do you yeah, she's still here. Okay, yes, I almost forgot. But yeah, we did this podcast and we have an article about radical self-care. So there is, and I've been getting people asking me a lot about how do you practice radical self-care when you work in these spaces that are constricting and things like that. How do you not burn out? You know, I was an academic I was a faculty member for 20 years, and now I'm an administrator, and I have to have outlets outside of my doctor identity, you know, where I can just be Donna. And sometimes just being Donna is, you know, having a glass of wine. Sometimes it's, you know, making 100 lumpia with my family. Like it just really kind of depends. But we talk a lot about preserving ourselves in the wake of all this kind of relentless pressure to perform. And so, Athena, I think, you know, when you say, you know, you got to regroup and things
Yeah,
like that, that's perfectly normal in the life cycle of an activist.
especially when I
1000%.
think cancer is so heavy too. Yeah,
Mhm.
particularly my space was really heavy with death and patients, and yeah, I apologize. I took a step back, but I also open the door for anybody that wants to get involved to help re-inspire and replenish because yeah, burnout is real.
Mhm.
100%. And we always have to remember, like in this journey with our identities and who we are and just becoming our authentic selves, to have grace and compassion and to, you know what it is. So everything is in the chat where you can find everybody. I hope you check us out. And you can find me at Asian_Soph on IG and TikTok. Dr. Donna, are you on TikTok? Because I feel like because I be on History Talk a lot and I'm about it.
But
Um,
I don't jump in because people say too much. I just post little pictures and little funky videos. I
I
don't say anything anymore.
uh,
I tried once and then I got a real funky response and I was like, you know what? I don't have a temper for this.
I'm just hollering. I do post a lot and share a lot about different things. But yeah, you can check me out there. And also, please check out Multiracial Americans on Instagram. That is the MASC IG, and also multiracialamericans.org. That is the MASC website. Thank you so much for joining us, y'all. This has been amazing. Panelists, I'll just have you stay on and we can do our final goodbye, but everyone else is free to go. Thank you so much for joining us and stay tuned for more.